Hello, everyone, and welcome. I want to welcome you to the NASPA for East Women in Student Affairs Knowledge Community Book Club webinar that we are hosting this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to give people about 1 to 2 minutes to log on, and then we will get started. So thank you so much, and we will be right back with you in about 60 seconds. Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, I want to do some introductions and a welcome. So my name is Eboni Turnbow. I am the Coordinator of Student Life and Leadership Development at Wayne State University here in Detroit, Michigan. And I also serve as the NASPA Region 4 East Women in Student Affairs Knowledge Community Representative. And so ideally, the Women in Student Affairs KC seeks out to host some form of engagement with you all quarterly to discuss various issues that concern women in student affairs. So today we are going to discuss the book Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. It is a New York Times bestseller. We've been reading it since November last year. And so ideally, we want to have a conversation with you, myself, and 2 other panelists from the leadership team are going to engage you. I want to say there is a chat box on the side of your feed. Please be a part of the conversation with us today. So you can ask questions. You can also put in your comments over on the right. I am going to be moderating throughout the series today. But even if you have not read the book and you want to ask a general question or comment, we would love to hear it. I will read them and take note of them. And then as we go throughout the series today, we will answer them and or make comments to your comments. So throughout the webinar, I'm going to remind you to drop your comments in the chat box. And in the meantime, we will have some questions that we will engage in. So we hope you enjoy. At this time, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, just your name, your institution, and anything you may want to say about yourselves for being here. So Julia, why don't we start with you?
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to get to be a part of this. Like Eboni said, my name is Julia Heck. I'm the Associate Director of the Office of the Ombuds at Eastern Michigan University. I am excited to get to engage in this conversation today. I had a lot of fun getting to read the book, and I'm excited for the dialogue that we'll get to have, and that viewers will be able to share their questions and comments, and for us to really have a meaningful conversation about this. So I'm just excited to be here.
Thank you. Mary?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Mary Duckworth. I am the Associate Director of Residence Life at Lake Forest College in Lake Forest, Illinois. I am a member of the WISA 4 East leadership team as well, and I'm very excited to be here. This was a new read for me, and I'm excited for this new platform to see how we can engage with each other and have some good conversations.
Awesome. Okay, so we are going to jump right in. So for those of you who may not have seen, this is the book. So Roxane Gay, again, it's entitled Bad Feminist. And what the book is, it's a collection of essays, actually, a very thorough collection of essays by her. And so the book has a lot of different topics and different things that has emerged out of it. So with the title being Bad Feminist, I felt it was appropriate to start off asking the panelists their thoughts on what are your views on Gay's definition of feminism. With that being said, do you agree with her definition? Do you have a different definition of feminism? Talk about how her definition may be different from what may be out there currently. So Julia, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think overall, when as I read the book and through her definition of feminism, really resonated with me. This idea of not wanting to tolerate what's currently happening or what is being the expectations being placed on us or the thoughts of other individuals. And that really, I feel like in the place and time that I'm at within my position and in my own personal pursuits, that I really felt that she was able to say things that I couldn't necessarily or hadn't necessarily put into words before. And so I really appreciated that, this idea of it being so broad that I'm just not willing to put up with or accept what other people want me to accept. And that doesn't make me, I really appreciated the way she said that doesn't make me a bad person either, that inability to accept something that I feel like, no, I shouldn't have to accept this and I shouldn't have to tolerate that. And I think that's where I come from with the idea of feminism, is that it's this appreciation for wanting to have improved situations, for wanting people to feel like these are conversations that we need to have, that we can continually improve, that we are human beings and we are far from perfect in many ways, shapes, and forms, and that's a continual growth process. And so for me, that's where I really see that definition come through, and that I think we can all continue to learn and learn from each other and learn in those spaces.
Absolutely. I would agree. I think that Roxane's core to me of her definition of feminism is essentially wanting to create equality and fairness for everyone. And I think how that relates to my definition of feminism is that very often feminism as a term has a negative connotation. And I think that the stressor of creating equality is important because it doesn't necessarily mean that it's anti-men or anti-chivalry or anti-roles specifically in regards to what some may consider men or women to do. But what it does mean is to close some salary gaps, is to put women in positions where they can also be at the table and make decisions that impact change politically, socially, culturally. And so I think that with her definition, I related to very much so, because it stressed the part about equality and fairness and not necessarily a hardcore anti-men movement, which is what I think majority of people think of when they hear the word feminism. So, Mary, anything to add?
I think real briefly, I appreciate both of your thoughts on that, and I would echo much of what you said. I struggled with the term feminism for a long time in my life, and I think we'll talk about more of this as we get into kind of the bad feminism or whatnot, but I haven't done a lot of reading about feminism or haven't made myself really stop and put a definition to it, and so this was a good opportunity for that. And I did appreciate how Roxane really talked about us as humans, and we're flawed, and feminism is flawed, that it's not, there's no perfect definition, there's no perfect way to live it. And that freedom really opened up, gave me the ability to open up to some new ideas and to allow myself to wrestle with the complexity of what feminism is. And I do think that at the core, it's about making things better. It's about that continual improvement and not being satisfied with better, but wanting great. So that really was helpful as I came to that definition.
Yeah, I want to read a quote from her book that's similar to this. And what she wrote was, "I sometimes cringe when I am referred to as a feminist, as if I should be ashamed of my feminism, or as if the word feminist is an insult. The label is rarely offered in a sense of kindness." So listening to that, tell me, why do you think Roxane mentions bad feminist and wanting to shy away from the term feminist and embraces more of a bad feminist concept? Can you talk about any misconceptions that may be associated with the two? Mary, you can start us off.
Yeah, I'll continue with what I was talking about in my definition, that this was the complexity of feminism, I think, has been hard for society, that you have to be all or nothing is often the espoused. And I think that's where the militant feminism or the anti-male feminism genre, is pegged, because again, it's all or nothing oftentimes. And I think that that's not true. I think that you can, you're open to choice. And so feminism can be, I want everything to be equal, which means you could like pink or I could like pink, or none of us could like pink, and that, that needs to be okay. And that's a very simplified, way to bring it down. But I think just talking about choice and talking about being comfortable with choices that maybe you wouldn't make, I think is sometimes where I know I've fallen into that trap of then not feeling like a feminist if I didn't appreciate choices. And that's some growth on my part, needing to work on that. But I do think that I felt like a bad feminist for so much of my life, and needing to maybe own that. What does that mean? Unpack it a little bit, and then figure out how my imperfections can give me strength as I work towards that general equality, which is truly at the heart of feminism, and that's what I can get behind.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that for those of you who may not be aware, but Roxane is a woman of color. And so to answer the question of why shy away, I think that the intersectional piece of being a woman, which is your gender, and then African American, which is her race, and as someone who can relate, I think it's really, really important that to be associated with feminists, oftentimes, especially in our community, it's you tell someone that I believe in gender equality or feminism, and it's this instant social judgment in our social environments, including workspaces, professional spaces, again, because of the misconceptions of what feminism is associated with. And so I really think that she shies away from the term because no one wants to deal with the constant pressures of having to explain over and over what feminism really is. But then I think people of color have to battle is it the gender movement that you're going to focus on, or is it the racial movement that you can focus on? And Lord knows, let's not let you identify in the LGBTQ community, because then that's another movement that is an intersectional piece of your daily association of your life. And so I think that for some, it may just be easier to not tell people that you're a feminist or that you're studying. I know I'm a current doctoral candidate in a sociology program focusing on gender inequality. And as soon as I tell people what I'm majoring, there's these looks, there's these stares. And I have no problem with, being confident in explaining why and what it is that I truly believe as a feminist, and not allowing societal norms to be placed upon me with the negative connotations on what it means. And so a lot of people are not able to do that, but we can't change the perception if we don't talk about it and if we don't express, what those ideals of feminism and bad feminism look like. So I think those keys are important. Julia, any thoughts?
Well, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think for me, when I thought about that quote and I think about how it ends up playing into how I've processed some parts of this book and how I've thought about that work, I think there's a big piece too where when we start to talk about being labeled as a feminist, or this negative connotation that comes with it, or this idea that she presents of being ashamed of it, I think there's to some extent where then when you try and engage in those conversations, and especially when you have those intersections, that then stereotypes or other negative connotations that are associated with that are a part of it, so that you can't be someone who's invested and expresses their thoughts around the gender movement without being and having to then accept certain negative stereotypes that come with being someone who's vocal in that, who has a different identity. And I think that's a huge part then too of why people shy away from these conversations, because they don't want to have to accept that onslaught from every direction they turn. And she references that a couple of times in the book, like, I'm tired. It's one of those where I look left and there's something being thrown at me. I look right and there's something being thrown at me. And how do you then navigate that space? And you get to a point where you're just like, I can't look either direction. So then what do I do? And so I think that's a huge piece of it. And especially when you start thinking about those intersections.
Yes, absolutely. And so for those of you who have joined in, I want to send a reminder that please join us in the conversation. go ahead and put your questions or your comments over off to the side in our chat box. We will reply and or respond to them. And thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you on the call. So we're going to continue on. And so I think it's important that we clarify. So we talked about, her definitions of feminism. And so when she talks about bad feminists, I want to ask, a statement in her book says, because she likes pink and she wants to be loved and catered to from a spouse, but yet she likes rap music. And so she classifies these things as kind of essentially making her a bad feminist. What does Roxane mean by that? Can a person be a bad or good feminist? What is your perceptions of her ideas of a bad feminist? Julia, start us off.
Yeah, I think that is a loaded question. I think, and I've had to work a lot, and kind of what Mary referenced at the beginning, a lot of my own personal self-reflection on what that really means to me and how I process that in the spaces that I'm in. Because I think I struggle with saying that someone is a bad feminist, because I think we all show up in the spaces in the ways that we can, in the ways that we're capable of at certain times and certain places. I think what I've grappled with, and because I think I've felt like she's felt that she references a lot in the book, and at times I feel like I'm a bad feminist for some of those things, whether it be the music I listen to or the ways that I show up in certain spaces. And I think sometimes those external expectations where I'm like, man, I should be better. I should know how to do this. I should know how to be in this space, and I don't. And I sit back and think, well, how do I learn how to show up in that space then? How do I invest in that growth and development? And what are my own personal expectations of how I show up in the space? Because I think we can also get caught in a trap of we don't ever move out of that space then, because we're so fearful of these either external expectations or internal expectations. And so I think we all, where I have to focus at least, is how can I show up in the best way to meet what these goals are? If it really is that we want to have a great situation for everyone, no matter their identities, no matter what groups they're a part of, these categorical things that we make up to help categorize our lives, but that I show up in the best way in those places. And that doesn't make me bad or good. It makes me who I am. And so I think I struggle with that question some for that exact reason.
No, that's very authentic of you. I think by Roxane's term and knowing myself, I guess technically would be a bad feminist. One thing about me, I am not, for anyone who follows me on social media, I often say I absolutely cannot stand gendered boxes. I do not like gendered ideals. I feel like it limits us in ways that inhibits us from reaching our ultimate potential of greatness and being dope at what it is that we do. And so I think that, she talks about liking rap music. And I chuckled when I read that because I'm a hip hop fan. And so a lot of hip hop lyrics are very misogynistic. They are very, very negative and sets us back in a lot of terms and lyrically in regards to what women, particularly feminists, are trying to change and move forward. And so often, right, it's like, well, I really like this beat and I really enjoy, the mood that it puts me in. But on the flip side of that, I feel like I have the ability to distinguish between music as an art form. And then, okay, where does it cross the line of, yes, it's an art form, but at the end of the day, it does not progress forward the change and impact that pushes women towards equality and respect, particularly in the areas of sexual violence, particularly in the areas of women appreciation, empowerment, things like that. So, and then she talked about this idea of wanting to be independent, but at the same time want somebody at home to take care of her. And I'm like, oh, she's speaking my life. Because I authentically own that at the end of the day, I want to get out and do for myself and can relate to these sentiments of hers. But it doesn't mean that we want to be in a place where, again, it's like an anti-men, you know, in an intimate relationship, there are still these boundaries that as a woman, you know, you want to embrace and want to experience. And so very often, you know, I have peers professionally and socially, again, when you have these conversations about genderism, you know, crack jokes about how feminists run their households, or how, you know, they need a man who's soft or weak. And, you know, I chuckle. I can't argue every battle, because I will have a degree in dismantling people's inaccurate perceptions from a lack of research and understanding. But that's neither here nor there. The point is, I think that a bad feminist, essentially, to me, is more so encumbersome of what does it really look like to be authentic and vulnerable and normal and human. And I think that's what she was trying to get across. At the end of the day, we're not perfect, and we can still believe in respecting women, and no means no, and the no more movement, while at the same time, like in 2 Chainz beat to whichever song it is of that day. So, Mary, comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I appreciate both of your stories, what you're sharing. As I was thinking about, it was one of the very first essays was really talking about this idea of bad feminism, and I kept ruffling on the word and the judgment that came from that. And part of it was, I felt it. I was like, oh yeah, like this is me. Like I've called myself this. And then I was like, I took a lot of time to think. I think this is why it took me so long to read the book. I had to like put it down every couple pages and be like, okay, what does this mean to me? Why am I feeling this? Which was good. But I did really ruffled on just the judgment part of it. And I think that's where we have that's what we need to come back from in terms of the feminist movement. It's not about good or bad. It's either you believe in the equality of men and women, and that's truly the heart of feminism, or you don't. And if you don't, then you don't call yourself a feminist. And I think most people are pretty open about that if they don't. And there's really no middle ground. It's kind of, it's a binary. You either are or you aren't. There's no middle part, and you're not good at it or bad at it. I think some of us, as Julia said before, are better at showing up in the spaces sometimes and maybe having the battles. But I think that's something to acknowledge, is that we can't fight every battle all the time, that there's nothing left for living at that point then. And so, yeah, you know, is it the music? I had a moment when I was reading her notes about, you know, liking rap music and some of the struggles with the lyrics and kind of her threshold and the point at which it became less enjoyable. And I found myself very easily like kind of dismissing that, because I was like, oh, I'm not really a fan of hip hop. Okay, so it's easy to be like, okay, you're right, it's bad. It's not a good genre. It just always talks about, you know, negative towards feminine. And I was like, that's not a fair representation. I need to check myself on that. But then I was like, so what does that mean about the music I listen to more often? One of the genres that I enjoy is country music. And I have struggled with that genre more and more as I have grown in my identity as a feminist, and the way that they portray women often in the songs, how heavily male dominated it is, and the gender roles that they put. You know, maybe they don't talk about violence against women as much, but they sure talk about their place and their role in the relationship more. And so I had to stop and challenge myself on that. So what does that mean, that I'm not openly, you know, talking negatively about that genre and the music and the images that it gives all of us as well? So it was interesting point of context. And we need to get away from the judgment. There's so much in the feminist movement that's good that we can all get behind. And I think we need to move towards those similarities as opposed to maybe the complexities that we differ on.
I think that's a great segue to the next piece of our questions, because one thing that I think Roxane did amazingly was to make a lot of her points relevant and current. She used a lot of media and a lot of movies and a lot of pop culture to really incorporate and integrate her ideals and her beliefs on these various aspects of feminism in the areas, whether it be sexual violence, whether it be the imagery of women in the media and so forth. So my question is, with that being said, what do you all think, how do you think it was impactful, as in how she used, you know, some of those pieces? For example, she went extensively into 50 Shades of Grey. She went extensively about the Trayvon Martin shooting. She went extensively about the bombing that happened in DC and Boston, excuse me, and so forth. So how do you think that was able to relate and transcend to the feminist thought and movement? So, Mary?
Yeah, I appreciated all of the social context that she gave in her essays. And I appreciated, I think perhaps as more of a peer, I know there was so many that resonated to me, both from childhood memories, the essay where she talked about, Sweet Valley High and the images of that, like that one was like, yes, it's my girl, I know it, I love it. And maybe in 30 years that will mean nothing to people. So on one hand, it'll be interesting to see how this lives on, and I think it will be an interesting study for someone perhaps in your position, Eboni, doing some research, later down the road on what it says about where we are. But to your point, I do think that having these really critical touch points makes it real for the reader right now. It's how did I respond to this incident? What were my feelings as a feminist? What were the actions I took or didn't take? And having to really think through that. I remember I've had so many conversations about Twilight with other people, and that being something that it was a guilty pleasure and loved and didn't want to talk about, but wanted to talk about. It was very strange in my life. But being able to think about that in a more nuanced way, in the lens of feminism and what that meant, and we could talk some more about this as we go forward too. But I appreciated how it made it real. Trayvon Martin was something that many of us, I would imagine all of us kind of in this context lived, and the reactions of it and what it meant for you. And so to see her take on it and then having to reflect that on yourself and the way you responded or didn't respond is all really critical. And that's, I think, where we need to do the work. That's the part that makes us be thoughtful about how we are progressing the feminist agenda or how we are not. And then kind of owning that on both sides.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the examples that she used were relevant because it was so broad and so diverse that it was almost impossible for it not to touch someone. So from movies to television shows to music and so forth. And I'll give an example. I am a Law and Order SVU diehard, probably seen every episode of every season. And she talks about in her book how this show perpetuates rape culture. And prior to, I never really thought about it in that light. If anything, I would have said, well, it's more on the fence of obviously looking for the, rapists and, really pushing how it's, a bad thing and needs to be more discussed, honestly, in our society. But it made me understand how just a popular and one of my favorite television shows really does just make women out to be like just consistently vulnerable. And a lot of the things from the show is, oh well, what was she wearing, why was she out so late, all these things of it's her fault. And my favorite is, why did she wait so long to report, right? And she talks about how a lot of the prominent fingers and these things like that and coming to light. And so I think it hits home because it's something that you can connect to and relate with. And then similar with 50 Shades of Grey, on the opposite, I do not watch 50 Shades of Grey. I have not read the books, but I'm familiar with what it's about. And so she talks about how, the dominance in 50 Shades of Grey for, sexual pleasure is largely more so negative, impacting women, because at that point, you're making things like such as power struggles and domination and things like that more of a one-way street from men to women versus more of an equal place of two enjoying the same type of sexual play. And so I think that she did a good job with saying, be careful on, your favorite book or your favorite show, because look at the underlying principles that are beneath it, because men have always been able to enjoy sex and always been able to engage and it be okay. But when women find something that they like and they are engaged with and let it be different than the quote unquote norm, then, that's when women are slut shamed and so forth. And so I think those are the types of sentiments that a lot of people do not take into consideration because it's just a movie or it's just a book or it's just a show. But a lot of these things have other underlying connotations that we have to socially be responsible for when understanding how someone's daughter or niece or aunt or mother are impacted by that. So I think she did a really good job of using pop culture to get her message through it and bring it home. Julia?
Yeah, I think for me, I really appreciated her use of it in a way to kind of bridge this 6 degrees of separation. I think all of these things can end up being insular events to us. You have this, I think about, especially with the books and movies, in that there's this release and they never all quite, they happen kind of, this is a moment in my life and then I move on, and this is a moment in my life. Or even with Trayvon and some of the major things like in Boston, they're moments in our life. And I think we can get caught up on, and she references it a couple of times throughout the book, this idea that there's this tragedy, then you have a call and you have a response, and then a tragedy and a call and a response. And I think not just tragedies, but movies, books, articles, these times in our life, they become these insular moments and we never really draw the line through them. It's kind of there in the back of our mind. But when someone points it out, then you're like, oh yeah, I don't know that I've spent actual time focusing on the fact that these are tied together in these weird kind of 6 degrees of separation way. And what does that mean? And how do I process that? And how do I figure out then how I engage in that space? And just like you said, how are you critical about these things that, oh yeah, in that moment I felt I was really into it. And I'm like, oh, well, wait a minute, let me reconsider this, or let me think about what that means. And so I appreciated her use of it, if for me to be able to connect some dots that I may not have been connecting before, and thinking deeper than just the kind of surface tip of the iceberg around, oh yeah, no, I liked it. It was a great series, or there's a lot of hype around it. And so I think that for me, that use of it helped me to make sure in other contexts, I'm continually coming back to a space of, here's how kind of each of these insular moments gets me to this point, and continuing to reflect on that.
Thank you, Julia. I want to transition a little bit and ask, it'll be a 2-part question, but we'll do the first part so again, it was a series of essays within the book. So which essays do you feel resonated with you the most? And tell us why. What components within those essays for you really struck and really stood out? So Mary, you want to start?
Oh, I knew you were going to start with me, and this was the hardest question. Partly because, and if I may, I'm going to jump to another question a little bit and answer. The idea of just reading essays and trying to pull that all together for a discussion, I found challenging, because I took each one and pulled something from it and really identified with it. And it was either so quick that it was over, and it was very gratifying, and then switched the topic, and my brain didn't always make those connections that Julia was talking about. I really appreciated, Julia, your thoughts on that, because I agree I think it was a tapestry at the end, but I didn't always see that happening as it went. So there were many that resonated with me, and I don't know that I would say there was any particular one, because I found something so strong in each of them. And I liked how they challenged me to think about something different, the seemingly small moments, or something that was sometimes uncomfortable, that I had to check myself on why it was uncomfortable and why I was struggling with that content or that topic. And that then actually made me appreciate it more once I took that time to reflect on it. And so I'm going to kind of cop out a little bit, not give specifics on the ones that I appreciated, but I liked the ones that made me a little uncomfortable and made me challenge my thoughts on feminism, which was many of them.
No, I agree. I think there are too many moments within her essays that resonated with me personally. So I picked 2. One is, she talked so much about intersectional identities, and I personally feel that that is a huge part of my daily life. And so whenever she was talking about, being a woman of color and a particular age and or a particular position that she may hold within something, sexual identity and so forth, any conversations around those ideals for me resonated, because it is a constant thing that I feel like, one, frequently has to be explained, and two, sometimes people think it's so easy to separate those identities. As a woman of color, if your Black card isn't stronger than your woman card, or if your woman card isn't in the right spot over your sexual identity card, and so on, I think that, judgments and lack of understanding impede what the essential feminist, is what she refers to it as, is essentially moving forward and creating this equality. So having someone else that related to those balancing and navigating everyday life with these various aspects of being a Black woman, working in academia, and pursuing, having the privilege of pursuing a terminal degree, in which we're talking about privilege in a little bit. But when she talked about that, that was important. The second piece that really stood out, though, to me, was when she was talking about women tearing other women down. And I co-authored an article not long ago, and one of the things we talked about is that women can be other women's biggest negators, and I don't always understand why. It's not to say that men don't have conflicts or issues with other men, but for whatever reason, supporting and empowering other women, or having to always compare whose struggle is more or worse or better, or however you want to say it. I think that women sometimes are some of the biggest problems to a lot of what we do. And she talked about that in her piece, and I was snapping an amen. And as I was reading, because I say that frequently, as I am, one of the core things that I'm all about as I talk to my students, and as I'm a part of other professional associations, and look to make connections and keep collegial relationships, is women have to empower other women, and it shouldn't be negated by race or sexual identity or privilege or class status or any of those things. And unfortunately, we live in reality, so it is. But those are some of the things that I'm trying to change, and so I think when she was talking about that, I appreciated her perspective and her authenticity, and I really was able to resonate and connect with that. So, Julia?
I think for me, like you both, I was able to find a piece in many of the essays that really resonated with me, where I'd be reading along and I'd be like, oh, yes, I really agree. Or I feel like I had a lot of moments where I was reading along and I was like, oh, that was something I did not want to hear, but I needed to hear it. And okay, pick myself back up and keep moving forward. And so for me, I think when I thought about all of the various essays, the one that really stuck out to me, and I think it's part of where I'm at in my life. I like you, Ebony, am in a doc program and just embarking on kind of the dissertation journey, and have been in a lot of places professionally where I've had to reflect on who I am and do a lot of kind of introspective work and think about how I want to show up in those spaces and what that means to other people. And this said self-reflective piece. And for me, her sections that really focused on me really hit home for me in either offering me questions or me being able to think about things further. And I really enjoyed not enjoyed it, but I found it to be the most helpful, her chapter on the typical first year professor. And it was one of those where I started thinking about it. I'm like, oh man, like this is what I'm feeling right now. And I don't necessarily know why, or I know why, but I don't know how to bridge that. And so like her closing paragraph in it, I'm like, I have no idea how I got to be the one at the front of the classroom, the one who gets to be in charge. Most of the time, I feel like the kid who gets to sit at the adult table for the first time at Thanksgiving. I'm not sure which fork to use, and my feet don't touch the floor. And I feel like it was something where I'm like, yeah, no, I need to figure this out, and I need to understand why that's how I feel in this space, and how do I figure out how to navigate that. And so kind of it ended up being the mindset that really helped me work through the rest of the essays in the book, and really helped me piece together the different feelings that I was having, the different ways that I was trying to learn and critically think about how I what I wanted to walk away from this with, and how I want to show up in spaces. And so I think it was both a little bit, I enjoyed reading the chapter, and I was a little bit like, oh, okay, all right, I can make it through, I can do this. And knowing that I'm not also the only person who's feeling that way, because I think we say it a lot of times. We're like, oh yeah, no, I totally feel that way too, but we never have authentic conversations around it where we're all like, yeah, no, I have this imposter syndrome, or I'm not sure if I should be in this space. But we never actually talk about what that means, or why we feel that way, or how we help each other move beyond that space. And I think it comes back to what you both have shared about that idea of competition, and that idea of how do we create a positive space versus a negative space to help uplift each other.
Yeah. So on the flip, which chapters and or themes in her book did not necessarily resonate or connect with you, or that you read and you disagreed with some of the sentiments that she was discussing? So I'll be fair, Julia, you can start this one off and give Mary a break.
Okay. I think for me, the ones I struggled with most was grappling with some of her same ideas, back to a question you asked earlier around this idea of being a bad feminist because I listen to a certain genre of music, or I really, or I enjoy reading a certain novel series or watching a movie. And I think it was hard for me to grapple with what does that mean, and my own expectations around that, of then, okay, is it like what you talked about, in what part of this music genre do I really like, and what's my intent in listening to it, and where are my boundaries in that? And I think she pushed me a little bit to think about those boundaries more than just, I think for a long time, and as I was processing this, that I was like, no, this is my escape. Like, I don't have to deal with student complaints. I don't have to deal with student issues. I don't have to have this deadline that's on the front of my brain. I get in my car to drive home, and this is my time to just forget about it all. But is that really true? And is that the way I'm actually showing up in that space? And is that the way I want to show up in that space? And so I think that was, although I really appreciated her use of those pop culture pieces to hit those points home, it was hard for me sometimes to read and really digest that in a way that I could pick it apart a little bit more than what I think I had ever given any due consideration to.
Yeah, my piece was similar, pulled from a similar place. So as we mentioned earlier, she pulled from some pop culture. And so specifically, the one piece that I kind of got where she was coming from and saw where she was going, but I don't know if I fully 100% would agree with her outcome. So when she talked about movies such as, she did a comparison talking about movies like Malcolm X, The Django, The Help, and so on. And she talked about how these movies, because they have popular actors or actresses, or because the acting was actually good, or the movies were entertaining, that the underlying sentiment of what the movies portray essentially still came back to the great white hope, or the white man or white woman coming to save the Negro, and so forth. So she talked about how these movies, I don't want to say bother her, but essentially made her feel some type of way because, is that people just see, oh, finally, Black people are in a movie where we're not dying first, or we're not the stereotypical, what we would say, ghetto actor or actress, and that we're in a role that's meaningful, or it's about Black history, that white people still aren't getting the savior aspect of saving the Negro, and The Help as an example, and who the movies are written by, who they're directed by. And so, as I say, I'm kind of on I see what she's saying, and I can agree to some sentiments, but then I would have liked her to go more in depth on then what is the alternative? What would she have liked, or would she recommend is a better offset to getting these messages better across to the audience? And I think about something like this weekend with Black Panther coming out, and It's an all Black cast, and it has been all over my timeline for like 6 months plus, at least minimum. And so it makes me think about movies like that, and I'm going to see it myself on Friday. So I think about, well, what if the movie's not good? Do we say it's good because it's Black Panther and it has to be good, or are there things that we can critique, or how would she have liked? I think about her perspectives and how she thinks movies like that should and shouldn't be done. And so I think that sometimes, there's no win-win in every situation. And sometimes you have to take things with a grain of salt. And so if I had to disagree or contest any of her points, I think for me, that's one of them. Mary?
Yeah, I appreciate both of your thoughts on that. From my perspective, I also, similar to what I liked, there wasn't any that stuck out as like, this one I don't agree with, or there was a sentiment that I didn't find something of value in. But there was a couple times, many times actually, where, as I referenced before, something made me uncomfortable and I had to stop and think about what that was. And as Julia said before, often it was, something that maybe I held dear, or I thought I had come to in a place of fancy, or looking for fun and escape, and having to take a step back and really acknowledge, is that truthfully how I used it? How should I have used that? And really challenging some of those. So I appreciate those moments. They were hard. There were some of them that I didn't really like what came out on the other end, but it's good work for me. I think this also speaks to knowing where I'm at, both personally and professionally. I'm a bit of a internal reflection stage, and so really trying to do some of that work. That's helpful to be there for this kind of book. But one of the things that as I was reading, it was a chapter that was early on, the one, How We All Lose, and it had really good things in it, talking about like is there a finite amount of good fortune, and how that is the narrative oftentimes, that's where that competition comes in. And I was agreeing with all of this, and then it got real heavy on literary references that I didn't have a reference for. And I couldn't tell if the purpose of that was to illustrate that she was really well read, which I know that she is, and then to give, like a book list of things to be reading, which it did kind of give me. But it also ended up making me feel a little like I had some self-consciousness about, should I know these more? Should I have these references that I don't have? Does that make me a bad feminist because I don't have all of this literature in my past? And I think that that's something, if I'm very honest with myself, I want to be well-read, and I want to be seen as well-read, but I don't always have that, the time and the literary knowledge to back that up. And so that was a hard thing to look at myself and acknowledge why I was struggling with that. But I think I lost some of the context because I didn't understand all of the literature that she was referencing, and that maybe will make me do more of the reading. But I think I also did lose some of the end result of her outcomes because of that.
Yeah, no, Mary. So I'm gonna tell you, it might be a little bit of you're not 100% on the readings, but she was referencing some things, and I'm not that I would know all be all, but as a gender studies student right now, even I was kind of like, huh? And so I think that leads to the next question that I was going to ask, because essentially, in the beginning when you said, was that to show that she had some areas of, well-versed expertise, but I also think that was a piece of her to kind of show this elitist academic, and maybe it was needed as a Black woman for her, but I do think that is a level of privilege that she for sure put out there, and some people could relate with it and some people cannot, and I think that is also one of the intersectional identities that she talks about throughout her book, outside of race, outside of gender, is class status and privilege, and understanding that, the reality is getting having the opportunity for education and moving forward and obtaining degrees and being able to write and publish is a level of privilege. But at the same time, even though that places her in a different status in one category, she still is receiving this discriminative aspect in compared to her male hierarchies, particularly her white male hierarchies. And so I think that, you know, privilege is interesting to me because, especially for Black people, because Black women, the reality is, are the most discriminated population because, you know, we have gender and racial inequitable things to battle on an ongoing basis. And so I think a part of it was a little bit of ego she did right there. And I think a part of it was to say, kind of, you know, y'all will respect my intellect. But then on the flip, I do think that put her in the elitist category of separating herself from being able to relate to, I guess, the non-elitist group. So Julia, do you have any thoughts on her sentiments around privilege?
Yeah, no, I appreciate those thoughts because I think I had moments where I read it and I think it was interesting to then compare that thought to kind of what she talked about in terms of like Lean In and some of the other books and the way privilege showed up in those spaces, to then think about it, how to then when we're talking in this context, where does it show up and how does it show up and how then, or what may have been rationales for showing up in the space that way. Like I think about, I think her use of pop culture in this was really good, but then did she have to, or did she feel that she had to kind of balance that then with giving herself some sort of credibility from the scholarly sense, or in a way try to bridge some of that, where I think there were moments where the way that privilege was talked about, it was good to have that conversation. I feel like in a lot of ways, I wanted some of these essays to go a little bit deeper and talk about why that was important for us to contextualize in different spaces, where she like started down a path and then I wanted it to continue. And I think that's to Mary answering the early question, where I found it difficult sometimes, where I wanted it to be more of a coherent narrative, not an essay format, because I wanted there to be something where I could say, yeah, no, you hit that point about that this really only comes and is only available to those in a certain socioeconomic status, especially the chapter on how we all lose and talking about this idea of, you know, yeah, it was really easy for you to be successful because you had these pieces lined up for you already. What about the person who doesn't have the ability to leave their job or doesn't have the ability to move an entire company across country to make it so they had better balance in their life? And so I wanted there to be kind of back to even what you talked about in the movies. I wanted there to be more solution driven, not actual solutions, because I don't know that there are those actual tangible solutions, but I wanted the focus to shift, not from pointing it out, but from saying, okay, what do we do with it now? We know this, we all talk about it. How then do we make that actually tangibly work and help build towards something? Not just kind of pointing it out and leaving it there for me to try and work through.
Yeah, from having verbal conversations with some other individuals who read the piece, that was one of their critiques, that they, you know, they would have liked a more cohesive piece, you know, and so I think a lot of it is style and preference. I think that how she wrote the essays is definitely different, and I think it was thought-provoking in some different ways of writing and publishing. As we begin to wrap up, I want to pose a closing two-part question for you all to answer. And essentially that is, you know, what did you ultimately take away from the reading, from the book, and how has this book, Bad Feminist, influenced your ideas on feminism moving forward? So
can I jump in real quick just to that back question? I think one of the things too, when I think about it, as much as I wanted it to be more cohesive sometimes for certain reasons, I think I also really appreciated it being essay style, because I feel like sometimes that's not sometimes, that is what our life is at times. Like, as much as I would love things to be in a certain order and yeah, let's just have this event flow into the next event and I got it all together, it is this weird kind of insulated moments that comprise our lives. And so I appreciated the essay format too, because I think it's more realistic at times. I was wondering, I'm like, yeah, no, I read this one essay and it really resonated with me because of the time and place that I'm in. And I think it's something, and especially going back to it, having read the whole thing, and pieces that I go back to or pieces that I reference where it is like, no, I can pull out these 10 pages and this is what I really need to focus on. And it's not, I think that kind of in a lot of books where they're designed in the chapter 1, chapter 2 builds on chapter 1, they reference chapter 1 and 2 and chapter 3, it can sometimes be hard because we end up thinking, or I end up building kind of these lines in my processing of this dot goes to this dot goes to this dot, when reality is they are not ever going to show up in that way or space again. And so I appreciated the essay style as much as I would have liked for certain topics or for certain lines of thought for it to have been more step 1, step 2, step 3. I think this also was helpful for me to read it in this way, to really feel like I was able to walk away with bits and pieces that are going to be more meaningful long term.
Thank you. Thank you for adding and for sharing that. Okay, so we got about 5 minutes left. So Mary, in about 90 seconds or so, tell us how you feel this book influenced your thoughts and practices moving forward on feminism, and what key things you took away from it.
Yeah, I'll take it back to some of the things that I started with, that I appreciated the candor that she talked about a lot of topics, the way that she tried to break down feminism that was the part that she did in a very non-scholarly way, and I thought was very accessible. It gave me some of that permission to do the self-work that I needed to do, to not be so hard on myself, that I can be imperfect, that as everything in life is complex, so is my vision of feminism and how I approach it. And that's okay, that I can be me, that I bring things to the table. And that's really what I'm trying to take away. And I will echo that the essay format was challenging, but also I think really beneficial ultimately to getting some of the messages and to giving me this space to do the self-work that I think is important moving forward.
Thank you. I'll answer the first part on how the reading impacted my feminism. One, I'll say that it reaffirmed my thoughts that, at the end of the day, we don't have to be perfect. Feminism is not perfect. And I think that for whatever reason, feminism is one of the movements that is constantly criticized with very little positive attention or thoughts behind it. And so we don't have to be perfect. It makes me think about imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is feeling like you have to live up to this perfect ideal and this perfect stereotype of what feminism looks like and what women are supposed to do and how we're supposed to act and things we're supposed to say and how we're supposed to dress and wear. And I can go on and on and on. And so it's a part of the reason why I try to live authentically as I can in all of my spaces, because again, by being authentically you continue to break down those gender boxes. And so I think that's one component that I took away from it. And then the other thing that I will say to answer the question on how moving forward, what I pulled from this, I think that a lot of people believe we are in a post-gender feminism society. And we are far from. I think because women are making progress in a lot of different areas, we just presume that, why do we need to still talk about these things? Why do we still, need to discuss inequities? Well, women are, I believe, up to 81 cents of the dollar of what men make. In academia, men still possess several of the top senior level positions, particularly in administration. And so I can go on and on with statistics, but the reality situation is if we don't have these conversations, then they'll be taken for granted, and we won't continue to close those gaps. And so her book, I read something that said, it's not new. A lot of the concepts you talked about are not brand new. These are not groundbreaking themes and barriers and ideals. However, the way they were written is what I have to applaud her for. And her authenticity and sharing so much vulnerable stories about her life. I empower other women to share those similar stories so that it may help the next person. So I applaud Roxane for her essays and her novel. So, Julia, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I think there are so many things that I took away from this book, and so many things that I want to continue to come back to, because I think the biggest thing for me in reading this and reflecting on it is that these are things that I have to continually ground myself in, that it's not, I read it, we have this great discussion, I want to implement it, and how do I do that? Because I also am very self-realistic in that I'm someone who I read this and then was like, there's like 30 things, and walked away, and then I'm like, nope, one at a time here, and how do you grow and how do you self-reflect in each one of those in that authentic way, like you're talking about? How do I give myself time and space where I'm meaningfully working on these things, and I'm thinking about what are my goals and what am I invested in? And kind of as she wrapped it up, how does she ground herself in continuing to come back to this conversation over and over? And then I don't let my regular day-to-day allow this to fall on the back burner. And so for me, I think that's a way that I really hope to continue to meaningfully use this, to be able to have it be something I can come back to and, let me recenter again and consider these thoughts as I continue to move forward. Because I think as I grow as a professional and as I learn more about myself and about the spaces and places I'm in, that those continue to grow and change and alter as well. And so how do I continue to bring myself back to that place? And I think for me, not only in just reading this book, but in conversations I've had in this self-reflective space that I'm in, giving myself grace to understand and to accept that I'm not perfect and that I am learning, and that I'm trying to, as much as she was trying to in this book, figure out how to espouse the values that I want to espouse, and how I want to contribute to the world, and how I want to continue to move forward, creating a better place and continually understanding where that mark moves to. That, yep, okay, we're to this place, but we can still learn and grow. Oh, we're to this place, we can still learn and grow. And how do I shift with that time? And so I do think I walk away with a piece of how do I give myself and others grace to be able to learn and be authentic in a moment and feel like we're all moving in that same direction in the best way.
Absolutely. Well, that brings our webinar to a close. So I want to say thank you to Julia and Mary for being willing to join us today and share their thoughts on the book and their opinions. And thank all of you who tuned in. We hope it was helpful. We will be having a similar webinar in late May on salary negotiations. So I encourage you to be on the lookout for dates and times and links for that. But thank you so much. We enjoyed you. We hope you enjoyed us, and have a great rest of the day.